We have another special treat this week, a watch-along that was demanded by so many of the listeners after we talked about the match and you revealed that you never have watched a match before. Hulk Hogan versus The Rock, WrestleMania 18, March 17th, 2002.
And let me just jump in here real quick. And I also revealed me and Stace were at the Sky Dome, but they put us up in the press boxes with the family and everything because I was up there for the developmental meetings. And we didn't want to sit in a giant fucking stadium and watch wrestling from a press box and be nice around the family. So we went back to the hotel early to get room service. And this was at a time when, to be honest, if I was watching wrestling, it was OVW. I was doing the OVW television show once a week, going to at least 2 spot shows a week, booking, selling sponsorships, running whatever the fuck I was. If Danny wasn't running it, I was running it. So I didn't watch most of the WWE at that time unless it was one of our boys that I was going to hopefully see that they didn't ruin. So anyway, having been suitably chastened, I did also do what you said, and I watched the match with the fucking sound up first, because it is an amazing spectacle with the sound up. Just to preface this, since I wasn't in on the creative or the build or whatever, there's no personal observations, but personal observations about the timing and the momentous occasion, the nature of it, the match. Toronto was one of the greatest North American wrestling cities going back, 75 years now. I mean, Whipper Billy Watson and Wild Bill Longson drew 15,000 people there at once or more than once in the 40s. As a matter of fact, anytime Bret Hart started the Canadian hero thing and Canada's greatest, the greatest wrestler ever from Canada, the first thing the old timers would say is, "What about Whipper Billy Watson?" Because he was huge in the 40s and 50s and 60s in the wrestling business. And Toronto, through the Tunney years, the Tunney family were the promoters, but during the time that they were booking talent from Detroit with the Sheik, everybody knows the Sheik had a record in Detroit for 7 years undefeated, which is what eventually killed the Sheik's deal in Detroit. He kept it going too long, but during that time, they were running every 2 weeks. And did the Sheik for 7 years draw less than 10,000 people to a show in Toronto? I believe that was the record also. Then in the 80s, Toronto was one of the major parts of Vince's expansion. Oh, and I skipped over the Carolina years when the Tunneys made the deal with the Crockett's. They got the best of Mid-Atlantic wrestling up there for quite a while in the 70s and early 80s. They were used to major talent. In the 80s, Vince's expansion, Hogan and Orndorff did 60-something thousand people at Exhibition Stadium in 86. In 87, WrestleMania, the Andre Hogan match was not in Toronto, but a lot of people forget, as you did when we talked about it before we went on the air, Detroit's 90 miles from Toronto. It's the same general area. Then they had the Sky Dome match between Hogan and Warrior, and then they get Hogan and Rock. So Toronto has always been a huge market. I mean, we were doing house shows in 96 at the Exhibition Stadium. Before the big Attitude Wars time period began, they could still draw 30,000 people in Toronto fairly easily. So Toronto's the perfect place for this match. And they knew going in that since this is a match of the icons, it's like Hogan and Andre, the irresistible force, the immovable object. This was billed, and rightfully so, as the past versus the future. And a lot of times, nostalgia trumps the current star. The hottest guy today is never thought as fondly of as the hero from days gone by, and especially when there's Hogan coming back to WrestleMania for the first time in 10 years, and to probably his greatest city in the world. So they knew there was going to be a mixed reaction. I don't think they knew quite as how vehement it was going to be, but that it set the stage. And this is a classic example. If this match was held in a vacuum, if these guys weren't who they were at that time, an icon and the hottest new star, this match would have sucked. Not in terms of the psychology, but in terms of a lot of the execution. If it was just two schmoes doing this without the crowd and without the personalities and without the build and the momentous nature and the histories of both guys, it's not a great wrestling match. But because it's them and the people were ready for it, this is perfect pro wrestling. This is what pro wrestling is. And if you notice in this match, even though they were obviously prepared to, I'll say this and then we'll get to it. They were obviously prepared to have a mixed reaction, Rock get booed, Hogan get cheered, whatever. They may not have been prepared for like I said, the extent of it. But even if this match was pretty much called ahead of time, it could have been, and I'm sure they called some audibles. It's the way that they performed the things they did in this match, not the things they did. Everything that Hogan and Rock, even though Rock was supposed to be the babyface and Hogan was supposed to be the NWO heel, everything in the match worked for that, but also because they were doing what these guys would have done if this was real. A lot of people have said that Rock switched places and played the heel. You'll see that that's not necessarily the case. It's the reactions from each guy. Hogan was doing heel shit and it was getting babyface pops because of watch his facial expressions and his body language. Rock was selling more like, especially once he caught on, more like a heel than a babyface. The bumps were a little bigger and a little bit more exaggerated. So they could have called this entire match in the locker room as Hogan the heel and Rock the babyface and gone out and done the same moves, but it would still got over this way because they went with the crowd and it was the way they did things, the way they reacted to the other doing the things, which we'll see some examples of. Does that make sense?